on the new unit, which is Unit 5. So we're going to talk about the physical geography of the Middle East. So here's something that is really interesting about the Middle East. It is not just like one specific place, and I'll explain what I'm talking about here. But the Middle East has a very interesting location, and I'll show you on a map in a second. But the Middle East is actually North Africa. It is the Arabian Peninsula, and it's actually part of almost like Eastern Europe. So it's like Asia, North Africa, and then West Asia. So that area that's in between Europe and East Asia and North Africa is known as the Middle East. So they have the tectonic plates were shifting, and that's shaped the landscape. As we know, and we've talked about this in A before too, all these places, all their landforms were created by tectonic plates or either by glaciers. But that's not happening in the Middle East because of where it's located. So it's all from tectonic plates sliding and pushing and grinding into one another. And it created the mountains, and it's also created large earthquakes. For example, in Turkey in 1999, they had a 7.4 magnitude earthquake. That's a big one. You can see the damage from it. It looks like a bomb went off. Okay, so the Atlas Mountains, this is North Africa's largest mountains. Hang on, this thing is whacked out. Okay, North Africa's largest mountains. It's located right at the Alboran Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, right in North Africa, in the country known as Morocco. This is what it looks like. When you think of Africa, you don't think of this, right? So it's kind of cool to think about. They have heavy rainfall and they have great farmland there, and the reason for that is they're right by the ocean. So they have all these ocean currents that go along the coastline, and sometimes they have storms, right? And these storms will be out in the ocean, but then when they go over landfall, they don't have any more water to evaporate into it, and that just leaves precipitation, and then it goes up over the mountains and it will rain, and that makes for good farming. Okay, the Caucasus Mountains, these are lowlands that provide irrigated lands, and they're contrasted by deserts. So you have lowlands that are good for farming because they have lots of water, and then you also have deserts in this region as well. The Karakum is known as the Black Desert, doing air quotes. Karakum is the Black Desert. It covers most of the country of Turkmenistan, which you can see over here. And this is what that Black Desert looks like. It kind of looks like Mars, right? It looks like it's from another planet, but this is what the Black Desert looks like, which is pretty interesting because this is what the lowlands look like, and then you also have this in the same region. It's just really interesting how they could have such a contrast of landforms, right? Okay, the Sahara Desert. This is the world's largest desert. Okay, it covers 3.6 million square miles. It's huge. You could fit the entire United States in the Sahara Desert, so it is really, really big, and it covers 11 countries, as you can see here. And in the Sahara, you have lots of sand and sand dunes, but you also have lots of oases, which are these pockets of water where you'll have palm trees and other vegetation. And that is important because the animals that do live in the desert still need water. So they will find these oases and they'll drink the water from it. The thing that's pretty cool about this is the fact that they have lots of like wind and storms and stuff. So these sand dunes blow around. So it might look like this today, but tomorrow it might look totally different. So it's always an ever developing landscape. Okay, the Dead Sea, it's landlocked. The Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because nothing lives in it. It's so salty that no fish can live in it. There's very little, plant life in it. There's very little, animal life as well. So it has heavy deposits of salt. It supports little to no life, and it's said to be therapeutic. And the reason for that is because the type of salt that's in it, if my little thing would go away here, I don't think it will, but the salt, this is what the salt looks like. And it's really not like the salt that you have in a salt shaker that you put on your French fries or whatever. This salt is more like Epsom salt, the kind of salt that a doctor would prescribe you if you had like a bad burn on your skin or your foot. This is the type of salt that can actually help heal inflation, and wounds. So in ancient times, the Dead Sea was like a medical place. Like doctors would send people to go live at the Dead Sea, for a year and bathe in its water as a healing, like a therapeutic. So the Dead Sea is pretty cool. Also, because it's so salty, it's very easy to float in the Dead Sea. So you could literally throw things that don't normally float into the Dead Sea and they'll float. People who don't know how to swim can go to the Dead Sea and you'll automatically float. Like some people, like if you don't know how to swim, you like freak out when you're trying to lay on your back and float in water. And the Dead Sea, you have no option. It just rips your feet out from under you and you float. So it's pretty cool. Okay, the Caspian Sea, this is the world's largest inland body of water. You can see here, it's like the size of an ocean, but it's completely landlocked, which is really interesting. So it's called the Caspian Sea because of its size, but it's completely landlocked, which is pretty cool. Okay, the Aral Sea, this has been rapidly shrinking since the 1960s. The Soviet Union used the Aral Sea for irrigation. They built different canals and stuff to it to draw water from the Aral Sea. And when they did that, they brought the water level so low that it actually split it into two different parts. So this is what it looked like in the 60s, and this is what it looks like now today. So you can see it's quite a bit different. You can see the boundaries of where the water should be, and there is still some water there, but it's not a whole lot in comparison to what it looked like before. And they've since built dams to kind of raise the water level again, but it's going to take a long time before the water level will go back to normal levels. It could take 50 years. Okay, the Nile River. This is the world's longest river. It's the birthplace of the Egyptian civilization, which we'll talk about in next week. And 90% of Egypt's population lives in the Nile Delta, which is, I'll show you a picture at the end, but the Nile Delta is just this part right here where my little red laser pointer is at. This is known as the Nile Delta because the Nile splits off into smaller rivers here and heads out to the Mediterranean Sea. And this is where 90% of Egypt's population lives. This is all Egypt right here. But 90% of their population lives right here. So it's pretty interesting. They built a Swanhai Dam, and this was a dam that was built to stop the flooding and the soil backup. In ancient times, the Nile would flood twice a year. In modern times, they don't want the river to flood twice a year because they built, cities and towns and roads and streets and all that along the river and by the river. And so they don't want that to flood twice a year because that can cause damage. So they built this dam to stop the flooding and the soil buildup. The Tigris and Euphrates, this is known as the Fertile Crescent, this region. It wraps around from here down the Mediterranean, so it makes like a sickle crescent type shape. This area in ancient times was known as Mesopotamia. It was a very historic civilization. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow through modern day Iraq, and they empty into the Persian Gulf, which is down here. And this provides farmland in the middle of a desert. So this is all desert, but right in between the Tigris and Euphrates, it's green and lush, and there's palm trees and grass and water, and it's like paradise in comparison to the surrounding areas. So very, very important. Okay, stream beds, they appear and disappear quickly. They're kind of like flash floods, but in a desert. So they have infrequent rain, and when they do get rain, it comes down all at once, and it can cause like a mudslide, but they call them wadis. And that's where you have like sand and water mix, and it turns into mud. It can move very quickly, it can be dangerous, and causes mud flows. And then natural resources, they have 60% of the world's oil reserves. So 60% of the reserve oil. So that means oil that they're not using for anything. 60% is in the Middle East. 50% of the world's natural gas comes from the Middle East, and they have control over oil prices because the countries in the Middle East formed a union called the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. That's what OPEC stands for, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Might want to remember that one. Wink, wink. they control the price of oil because they produce so much of the world's oil. They can set the price and no one can undersell them because they don't have enough supply. So if they tried to sell oil cheaper than OPEC, OPEC could crush them because they have more oil, because then they could undercut the person who undercut them and completely wipe their supply out. So OPEC has a lot of power and clout in the international world. They throw their weight around a lot. And then Morocco is the world leading producer of phosphate. Okay, so I think that is it. This is the Nile Delta. So you can see how green it is here in comparison to like over here. So 90% of Egypt's population lives right here. All right, cool. That's it for the notes. Thanks for watching.